The chamber was silent until it wasn't. A pointed remark cut through the air like a blade, shattering the veneer of civility. Judge Amy Coney Barrett leaned forward, her words sharpened with disdain, and unleashed a biting attack that stunned even the seasoned observers in the room. It wasn't just a legal question, it was personal, searing, aimed to belittle Jasmine Crockett's very presence. Gasps rippled through the audience. Phones lifted instantly, fingers scrambled across screens. Hashtags already beginning to form in the minds of those who lived for these moments. Crockett's eyes narrowed, her silence louder than Barrett's. Accusation, the weight of history pressed down on her shoulders. Generations of women, people of color, and the unheard all, watching to see how she would respond. The tension was thick, almost unbearable, as if the entire chamber had stopped breathing. Barrett had not simply asked a question. She had drawn a line in the sand, daring Crockett to step across. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. This wasn't just a courtroom exchange. It was a clash of values, a collision of worldviews. Barrett, cloaked in authority, representing tradition and exclusion. Crockett, standing in the crosshairs, embodying progress, defiance, and the fight. For dignity, the insult was meant to humiliate, to establish dominance. Instead, it electrified the atmosphere. Social media would later replay this moment endlessly, dissecting every syllable, every pause. But in the chamber, time seemed suspended. Allies clenched fists beneath tables, adversaries smirked in anticipation, and millions beyond those walls waited for what would come next. Crockett inhaled, slow and steady, her expression unreadable. The question now wasn't whether she would respond, it was how. The anticipation became its own kind of storm, building, swirling, threatening to break loose. The judge's smirk hinted at certainty, as if she believed the trap had been set and the outcome preordained. But what Barrett didn't see, what the cameras were about to capture, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't shaken. She was calculating. And when she spoke, her words would not only pierce the insult but flip the entire trial on its head. Because the room hadn't seen anything yet. Long before Judge Barrett's words ignited the room, the tensions had been simmering beneath the surface. This trial wasn't just another procedural clash, it was a mirror held up to America itself. Every decision, every barb, every rebuttal carried symbolic weight. And in that moment, the stakes became painfully clear. This was no longer about one case. It was about who gets to define truth, who wields power, whose voices count in the story of America. For Barrett, the courtroom was her fortress, the stage where her authority could not be questioned. Her supporters saw her as the embodiment of order, the guardian of tradition, the steady hand that kept America rooted in a past they longed to preserve. But for millions of others, Barrett represented something far darker, the barriers erected against progress. The silencing of those who dared to demand justice, the institutional arrogance that dared to dictate whose lives mattered. Jasmine Crockett stood at the opposite pole of that vision. She wasn't merely defending herself. She was standing for everyone who had ever been dismissed, doubted, or disrespected in halls of power. She carried the hope of young activists, the pride of immigrants, who believed in the promise of America, the fire of generations who had fought for dignity against overwhelming odds. And now, under the blinding lights and the scrutiny of a divided nation, all of it came to a head. The insult Barrett launched wasn't just a personal jab, it was a test. Would Crockett fold under pressure? Would she hesitate, stumble, or retreat? Or would she transform the moment into something larger, something unforgettable? Social media users watching live feeds were already bracing themselves. Comment threads exploded with outrage and anticipation. Did she really just say that? Crockett better destroy her. This could be the moment everything changes. The virtual crowd roared in real time, amplifying the tension inside the chamber itself. The world wasn't just watching it, was demanding a reckoning, and that's why this mattered so much. This wasn't politics as usual. This wasn't a legal technicality buried in the footnotes of history. This was a cultural earthquake waiting to shake the foundations of American identity. The stakes were dignity versus arrogance, inclusion versus exclusion, justice versus dominance. Everyone in that chamber knew it. Everyone watching online felt it. The question was no longer if Crockett would respond, but how devastating that response would be. And what Barrett didn't realize in her moment of smug certainty was that she had just triggered the exact scenario she feared most, giving her opponent the stage to deliver the kind of counterattack that could echo far beyond the courtroom walls. Because what happened next wouldn't just shape one trial, it would ripple outward, igniting debates across dinner tables, campuses, and newsrooms. It would trend on every platform, command headlines, and inspire those who had long waited for someone to stand tall against. Arrogance cloaked in power. The stakes were no longer legal. They were moral. They were cultural. They were national. And what was about to unfold would not only shift the momentum of the trial, it would shock the conscience of America. What happened next changes everything. Asterisk. To understand the sting of Barrett's words, you have to understand the figure behind them. Judge Amy Coney Barrett didn't arrive in that chamber as a blank slate. She came with a legacy, crafted, polished, and paraded before America as a symbol of conservative triumph. On paper, her rise looked like the embodiment of merit, a law professor turned federal judge, a Supreme Court justice whose name carried weight in every political circle. But scratch beneath the surface, and the contradictions were impossible to ignore. Her career was built on projecting humility and arrogance. Leaked through every public appearance, she spoke of fairness, of neutrality, of being a humble servant of the law. But time and again, her rulings, her questions, her carefully chosen words revealed an unmistakable tilt. The scales tipped toward those already in power, against those who dared to challenge it. She cloaked herself in faith and family values, yet wielded those same values as weapons to narrow the definition of who belonged in America's promise. Critics saw it clearly. They saw the hypocrisy in how she framed herself as apolitical, while accepting the full embrace of partisan machinery. They saw the contradiction in preaching compassion, while stripping away protections from the vulnerable. They saw the arrogance in her soft smile, that infuriating calm that wasn't serenity at all, but a performance of superiority. And on this day, that performance reached its breaking point. The insult hurled at Jasmine Crockett was not born in a vacuum. It was the natural extension of years of positioning herself as untouchable, above reproach, as if her word carried the weight of divine judgment. But behind that mask was fragility that lashed out when challenged, that recoiled when confronted by strong voices unafraid to disrupt the order she represented, and that was the irony. For someone so steeped in the language of law and precedent, Barrett could not resist the impulse to strike personally. That slip, that arrogance, exposed her. It wasn't about the purity of the law. It was about control. It was about reminding Crockett, and everyone watching, that she believed herself superior. The contradictions piled up like a case file too heavy to ignore. Barrett had claimed devotion to protecting constitutional rights, yet was quick to limit them when they clashed with her ideology. She championed family values, yet her decisions eroded the security of countless families. She spoke of dignity, yet wielded cruelty with a velvet glove, delivering judgments that left lives in ruin while her smile never faltered. And the hypocrisy didn't stop at her rulings. It was in how she framed her own story, painting herself as a woman who had overcome obstacles, yet showing no empathy for women facing obstacles far greater than hers. It was in how she spoke of representing all Americans, yet consistently narrowing the circle of who counted as all. To many, Barrett's presence on the bench symbolized a wall erected against progress. She was the living embodiment of the system's double standards, a judge who claimed impartiality but served as the hammer of one ideology. Her arrogance wasn't just personal, it was institutional. And in that chamber, in the moment of her attack, all of it crystallized. The audience could feel it. They didn't just hear her words. They heard every ruling, every statement, every contradiction behind them. They heard the years of hypocrisy condensed into one sharp insult aimed at silencing someone who refused to be silenced. And that's why the frustration grew so quickly. People weren't angry only because Crockett had been attacked. They were angry because Barrett had revealed in a single instant the very thing critics had been saying for years, that her calm demeanor was nothing more than a mask for arrogance. Her neutrality, nothing more than a facade for bias. The downfall, in that sense, had already begun. Because arrogance unchecked always plants the seeds of its own undoing. And as Barrett leaned back, certain she had scored her point, the energy in the room shifted. Viewers across America began to crave not just a response, but a reckoning. They wanted to see the mask ripped away. They wanted to see arrogance humbled. They wanted to see justice delivered not just in rulings, but in real time before their eyes. And that's exactly what Jasmine Crockett was preparing to give them. The trap Barrett thought she had set was, in fact, a stage she had unwittingly built for her own unraveling. What came next would not only expose her hypocrisy, but transform the confrontation into a cultural earthquake. Because when arrogance collides with dignity, history remembers only one, and the room was about to witness it. Firsthand, to understand why Jasmine Crockett's silence in that moment spoke louder than Barrett's insult, you have to step back into the story of who she is, and why she stands where she stands. Crockett did not arrive in that chamber through inherited privilege or institutional favoritism. She fought her way there, piece by piece. Through doors that were never meant to be opened to her. Her story begins not in marble halls, but in neighborhoods, where justice was something people prayed for, but rarely saw. Raised in a working-class family, she was taught from an early age that dignity wasn't handed to you. It was earned in how you carried yourself when the odds were stacked against you. Her parents instilled pride in heritage, resilience in adversity, and a belief that silence in the face of injustice was never an option. That belief became her compass. As a student, she confronted barriers both spoken and unspoken. Teachers underestimated her. Classmates doubted her. Institutions tried to narrow her possibilities. But Crockett transformed every doubt into fuel. She devoured books, debated relentlessly, and pushed herself into spaces where no one expected her to thrive. She wasn't supposed to outshine the privileged few who walked into the system with golden keys, but she did, again and again. Her path into law was not about prestige, it was about service. She saw friends targeted unfairly, families broken apart, immigrants stripped of dignity. She saw the gap between what America promised and what it delivered. And she resolved to bridge it, not with anger alone, but with relentless determination. Nights spent studying while others slept, days spent working jobs that paid the bills but drained the energy. Yet through it all, she never wavered in her mission, to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Her sacrifices were real. While others advanced with ease, Crockett carried the double burden of proving herself in a system skeptical of her very presence. She endured whispered slights, coded dismissals, outright hostility. Each time she faced a choice: withdraw or stand taller. She chose the latter, knowing that every victory was not hers alone, but belonged to the communities she represented. This is what makes Crockett unique. She doesn't walk into a courtroom for herself. She carries with her the weight of countless untold stories, immigrant parents working double shifts, young people silenced by systems stacked against them, families fractured by policies that valued power over compassion. She knows their struggles because she has lived pieces of them. Her triumphs are their triumphs. Her fights are their fights. And in the chamber that day, as Barrett attempted to belittle her, Crockett's silence was not weakness. It was history compressing into a single moment, a storm gathering before the strike. She had been underestimated. Before, she had been told she didn't belong before. She had been pushed into corners before. And every single time, she had emerged stronger, sharper, more unshakable. That's why she was perfectly positioned for what was coming. She wasn't rattled by Barrett's arrogance because she had faced worse. She wasn't distracted by the insult because she had been targeted by systems, not just individuals. She wasn't afraid of the confrontation because she had spent her entire life preparing for it. To the audience watching, her composure was magnetic. People who had felt dismissed or invisible saw themselves reflected in her calm. People who had endured humiliation recognized the strength it takes to not just endure, but to respond with precision. Crockett's power wasn't in raising her voice or showing anger. Her power was in her control, her ability to bide time until the perfect response could flip the script entirely. Social media comments began to capture it even before she spoke. She's not scared. Look at her face. She's calculating. This is about to get good. Viewers across the country leaned closer to their screens, sensing the gravity of what was building, because Crockett didn't need the stage. Handed to her, she seized it. And Barrett, in her arrogance, had just offered the perfect opening. By attacking her personally, the judge had unwittingly invited Crockett to show not just intellect, but character. Not just argument, but moral authority. This was more than a courtroom clash. This was a battle between two Americas, one rooted in exclusion, hierarchy, and preservation of power. The other fueled by resilience, diversity, and justice for all. And Crockett embodied that second America with every breath she took. Her life had prepared her for this confrontation. The sacrifices, the struggles, the uphill climb, all of it sharpened her into the kind of leader who could not only withstand an attack, but transform it into a turning point. As she finally drew breath to speak, the anticipation reached a fever pitch. The audience wasn't just waiting for words, they were waiting for vindication. For that moment when dignity finally stood tall against arrogance and refused to bow. What no one realized yet was that Crockett's response would not merely defend her. It would redefine the entire trial, sending shockwaves far beyond those walls. And as the silence deepened, as the world leaned in, one truth became clear. Jasmine Crockett was not there to play defense. She was there to deliver a reckoning. The silence broke like glass. Crockett's voice, measured and unwavering, filled the chamber. She did not rush. She did not stumble. Her words came with the weight of purpose, carefully chosen to slice through the insult without a hint of hesitation. The room leaned in, reporters, aides, even Barrett herself, as Crockett began to turn the confrontation into something larger than anyone expected. Barrett tried to interrupt, her tone sharp, authoritative, meant to reassert control. But Crockett did not flinch. She raised her hand slightly, not in aggression but in command, and continued. The shift was subtle but undeniable. The authority in the room was no longer Barrett's. It was Crockett's. Every sentence carried dual meaning, one for the chamber, another for the millions watching across screens. Crockett framed the insult, not as a personal attack, but as a symptom of something deeper, the arrogance of power that had long dismissed voices like hers. Her words resonated not only as a rebuttal but as a rallying cry. Barrett, for the first time, appeared unsettled. Her attempts to regain the upper hand sounded brittle, defensive. She repeated herself, grasping for legal jargon, cloaking herself in the technicalities that once made her untouchable. But the audience could feel it. Her control was slipping. The exchanges grew sharper. Crockett's calm precision met Barrett's increasingly agitated rebuttals. Every time Barrett struck, Crockett countered not with volume, but with clarity. Every time Barrett sneered, Crockett's composure only magnified the contrast. The villain's veneer of superiority began to crack, and the hero's dignity only shone brighter. The chamber itself seemed transformed, where Barrett once commanded. Silence, now murmurs of approval, punctuated Crockett's statements. Where Barrett expected nods of agreement, she met furrowed brows and shifting gazes. The balance of power was tilting in real time, and Barrett knew it. Social media fed the fire. Clips of Crockett's poise against Barrett's interruptions flooded feeds within minutes. She's owning her. Barrett looks rattled. This is history unfolding. Hashtags began to trend as the world outside amplified the drama. Inside, what had started as a moment of insult had now escalated into a national spectacle. Barrett attempted one last pivot, pressing Crockett with a loaded question designed to corner her. It was the kind of tactic Barrett had used countless times before, the kind that left opponents fumbling. But Crockett was ready. She paused, pause so deliberate it felt cinematic, then dismantled the question piece by piece, exposing its flaws while maintaining the calm of someone who had anticipated it all along. The room shifted again. Barrett's smirk had faded, her tone wavered, and Crockett, still composed, leaned into the silence that followed her answer, letting the weight of her words settle like a verdict. This was no longer a clash of arguments, it was a clash of character. One woman stood, rattled, defensive, undone, by her own arrogance. The other stood firm, dignified, embodying the strength of every community told to stay silent. The contrast was undeniable, and the audience could feel the inevitability building. A reckoning was coming. Barrett tried to regain footing, but the damage was done. Crockett had not only withstood the attack, she had turned the tables. Every attempt by Barrett to reassert control only highlighted her unraveling. Every calm rebuttal from Crockett only magnified her command, and just when it seemed the confrontation had reached its peak, Crockett leaned forward, her tone sharpening, her words preparing to deliver the blow everyone had been waiting for. Because this was no longer escalation. It was the brink of the counterattack, and what came next would leave the chamber and the nation in disbelief. The pause before Jasmine Crockett spoke again stretched like a taut wire, trembling with the weight of everything that had been sedaned, everything that was about to come. Barrett leaned back, her expression taut with feigned calm, but her eyes betrayed unease. The chamber seemed to lean forward as one body, as if every soul inside knew the silence was not empty. It was the inhale before the storm, then Crockett began. Her words came slow, deliberate, each syllable striking with precision. She didn't shout, she didn't need to. The clarity of her voice carried more force than any raised tone could. She acknowledged Barrett's insult head-on, not with bitterness, but with surgical control. When someone resorts to personal attacks, she said, her gaze steady, it usually means they've run out of arguments. The effect was instant. Gasps rippled through the chamber, the kind that escape involuntarily when the truth slices too sharply to ignore. Barrett's face hardened, but she said nothing. Crockett had landed the first blow. She didn't stop there. Crockett began weaving a story not of herself alone, but of the people whose struggles mirrored her own. She spoke of immigrants who sacrificed everything to build a better life, of families torn apart by policies that cared more for power than compassion, of communities dismissed and demeaned by the same arrogance that had just played out in the chamber. Her words built layer upon layer, until her counter-argument was no longer just a defense. It was an indictment not just of Barrett's insult, but of the very values Barrett represented. Barrett tried to interject, her voice rising in frustration, but Crockett held up her hand calmly. The gesture was small, but the authority in it silenced the room. The audience knew it. Viewers online knew it. Barrett was no longer in control. Crockett pressed on, turning Barrett's own contradictions into evidence against her. You speak of fairness, she said, yet dismiss voices that challenge your worldview. You claim humility, yet your words reveal arrogance. You speak of dignity, yet seek to strip it away when it doesn't fit your narrative. Which is it, Judge? Fairness or favoritism? Another wave of murmurs surged through the room. The camera zoomed in on Barrett, who shifted uncomfortably, her smirk gone, her composure cracking. Crockett paused again, letting the silence linger, letting the weight of her challenge settle. This was not improvisation. This was mastery, the art of knowing when to strike and when to let the echo of your strike hang in the air. And then came the turn. Crockett shifted from dismantling Barrett to lifting the conversation higher. She framed the confrontation not as a battle between two individuals, but as a clash between two visions of America. One vision clings to exclusion, to arrogance, to the belief that power belongs to the few. The other believes in justice, in dignity, in the promise that America is big enough for all of us. The crowd audibly stirred. A few heads nodded. Even those trying to maintain neutrality couldn't hide the resonance of her words. Social media erupted with clips of the moment hashtags, like hashtag truth over arrogance and hashtag Crockett mic drop shot into Trending lists, Barrett attempted one last desperate pivot, her voice sharp, her words a frantic grasp at authority. But Crockett met it with calm defiance. "Judge, I've spent my life fighting to be heard in places where I was told I didn't belong. This chamber may be your fortress, but it is not immune to truth.
Ow.
And truth, shocking as it may be, has a way of breaking through." The chamber erupted, gasps, murmurs, the clatter of reporters' keyboards firing all at once. Barrett sat frozen, her jaw tight, her authority shattered not by anger, but by composure. Crockett leaned back slightly, her expression calm, almost serene. She had delivered her counterattack not as an outburst, but as a crescendo measured. Deliberate, devastating, the villain had unraveled. The hero stood unshaken, and yet she wasn't finished. She delivered her closing blow with the kind of moral clarity that leaves no room for rebuttal. "At the end of the day, this isn't about me or you. It's about the people who trust us to fight for them. And if I have to choose between arrogance and power or dignity and service, I will choose dignity every single time." The words landed, like a gavel striking wood, final, irrefutable. Barrett lowered her gaze. Fumbling with papers that suddenly offered no refuge, the imbalance of power was undeniable. The mask had been torn away. The chamber, once her stage, had become her undoing, and Crockett, calm and unwavering, had not only defended herself, she had flipped the entire trial on its head. The room buzzed. With energy, reporters rushing to capture the headline, social media ablaze with clips that would be replayed endlessly. Hashtags multiplied, memes sprouted, commentators lined up to weigh in. What had begun as a calculated insult had backfired into a defining moment. But as Crockett sat back, her composure intact, the real question wasn't whether she had won this exchange. It was already clear. The real question was, what ripple effects would this moment unleash across the country? Because this wasn't just a counterattack. It was a turning point. And the aftermath would send shockwaves through politics, media, and the national conversation itself. What came next would be nothing short of explosive. The moment Crockett's words landed, the chamber erupted, but it was nothing compared to what unfolded beyond those walls. Within seconds, clips of her takedown flooded social media. Screens lit up with the exact moment she declared, "Power doesn't come from the chair you sit. In it comes from the truth you carry." That single line became the spark that ignited a national firestorm. Twitter's trending page was instantly dominated. Hashtag shocking truth. Hashtag Crockett vs. Barrett. Hashtag power of truth. Thousands of retweets per minute turned into millions by nightfall. Edits of the exchange slow-motion close-ups of Barrett's unraveling. Set to dramatic music circulated at lightning speed. Meme culture did the rest. Barrett's flustered. Expressions were plastered on side-by-side comparisons with crumbling statues, melting candles. Even cartoon villains, defeated by their own arrogance. Crockett, meanwhile, was elevated to superhero status. Fan art portrayed her in a cape, microphone in one hand, Constitution in the other, standing tall against a collapsing Capitol dome. The reaction was not limited to internet humor. It was visceral, emotional, raw. Viewers who had never cared for politics flooded comment sections. "I don't usually watch hearings, but this made me believe in something again. She spoke for me, for my family, for everyone who's been told to shut up." Stories poured in of young women, immigrants, activists all saying the same thing. They felt seen. Cable news caught the wave instantly. Networks scrapped their planned programming to loop Crockett's speech. Debated its impact in real time. Was this the birth of a new political star? Was Barrett finished? Was this confrontation a cultural turning point? Pundits sparred on panels, but for once, the audience was ahead of them. People weren't waiting for permission to call it historic. They had already decided. Celebrities joined the chorus. Musicians posted the clip with captions like, "This is what courage sounds like." Actors uploaded dramatic readings of Crockett's lines, amplifying the performance into an artistic phenomenon. Hashtags crossed from politics into pop culture, breaking into TikTok dances, Instagram reels, even late-night comedy skits. One viral video paired Crockett's mic drop line with the bass drop of a chart-topping song. And within hours, it had tens of millions of views. Politicians scrambled to align themselves with the moment. Progressive leaders hailed her as a warrior for truth and justice. Even moderates who usually avoided controversy tweeted praise, sensing the cultural wind had shifted. Meanwhile, Barrett's allies struggled to mount a defense. Their attempts to spin her insult as misinterpreted or taken out of context fell flat against the tidal wave of viral proof replaying endlessly online. Commentators noted something crucial. Crockett had not only dismantled Barrett, she had reframed the debate itself. No longer was the narrative about a judge's authority versus a representative's audacity. It was about dignity versus arrogance, truth versus performance, justice versus control. And in that framing, Crockett was the uncontested victor. In classrooms, students replayed the clip as part of debates on power and fairness. Community centers held watch parties, turning the speech into a communal experience. Parents shared it with their children, calling it a lesson in standing up to bullies in any form. The ripple effect reached beyond politics. It became a cultural anthem. Barrett's silence in the days following only deepened the impact. The woman once cloaked in unshakable authority now appeared diminished, her credibility shredded by a single confrontation. Her defenders dwindled as even neutral observers admitted. The optics were devastating, the damage irreversible. Meanwhile, Crockett's star soared, and invitations poured in for interviews, speaking events, endorsements. Editorials hailed her as the voice of a new America, one unafraid to call out hypocrisy in the halls of power. Social media bios shifted overnight to include her quotes. Memes turned into murals, graffiti, posters. The resonance was unstoppable. And yet amid the chaos of hashtags and headlines, there was a deeper current. Crockett's words had tapped into something buried but not forgotten. The longing for justice that feels real, human, visceral. She had reminded the nation that truth could still triumph, even against arrogance cloaked in robes of authority. The aftershocks continued to spread. Commentators described it as a cultural earthquake. Celebrities called it a moment of courage. Politicians labeled it a turning point. But for ordinary people it was simpler. It was the day they saw someone like them stand tall, unflinching, against someone who believed she could never be challenged. And that memory, that feeling, would not fade quickly. Because if Section 6 was the explosion, Section 7 was the shockwave, the reverberation that carried. Crockett's words from one courtroom clash into the SVE, bloodstream of America itself. What remained was the question: what lasting lesson would the nation take from this battle? And in the next act, that moral truth would come into sharp focus as the dust settled from the viral firestorm. One truth stood above the noise. Jasmine Crockett had not just defended herself, she had reframed the very idea of power. The insult meant to diminish her had instead become the catalyst for a universal lesson that resonated far beyond politics. In interviews, Crockett never gloated. She never framed it as winning against Barrett. Instead, she widened the lens. This was never about me versus her, she told one anchor. It's about justice versus hate. It's about dignity versus arrogance. And every time, dignity must win. Her words struck with the force of clarity. In a climate thick with division and cynicism, she spoke to something deeper, something human. She reminded people that politics wasn't just about policy or party lines. It was about values. It's about who we choose to be when confronted with cruelty. Her reflection became a rallying point. Arrogance shouts. Justice speaks. Hate divides. Dignity unites. We all have to decide which voice we'll listen to, and which one will echo. Crowds began quoting those lines at rallies and town halls. Teachers wrote them on classroom boards. Commentators described them as the new creed of a movement hungry for integrity. What started as a courtroom clash had transformed into a moral reckoning that left the nation questioning not just Barrett's arrogance, but the culture that allowed it. And in Crockett's framing, the lesson wasn't limited to politics. It was personal, intimate. She spoke directly to those who had ever been silenced or belittled, the immigrant worker dismissed as invisible. The young student told their dreams were too big. The mother overlooked in boardrooms. The father ignored. In courts, her message was clear: your truth matters, your dignity matters. And no insult, no arrogance can erase it. The crescendo of her words turned inspiration into action. Organizations reported spikes in civic engagement. Voter registration drives used her speech as a rallying call. Young people who had never cared about politics before began sharing clips with captions like, "If she can stand tall, so can I," and yet the lesson carried humility. Crockett never claimed to be flawless. She reminded audiences that struggle, sacrifice, and imperfection are part of the fight for justice. What mattered was not perfection, but persistence. Not grandeur, but grit. The moral arc of her story was clear. Power rooted in arrogance will always crumble, but power rooted in dignity endures. Barrett's smirk had faded, her authority exposed as fragile. Crockett's calm had grown into a movement, not because she shouted louder, but because she spoke truer. It was a reminder that America's promised justice, equality, freedom is not preserved by those who guard privilege. It is preserved by those who refuse to be erased, those who stand tall when told to shrink, those who carry truth as their shield, and as Crockett's words echoed across the country, they crystallized into something larger than a viral moment. They became a mirror held up to the nation, asking, which path will we choose? The path of arrogance, where insults pass for strength, or the path of dignity, where justice guides us forward? The choice was not hers alone. It belonged to every viewer, every citizen, every person moved by her defiance. That was the brilliance of her counterattack. It didn't end in the chamber. It began there and continued in the hearts of those who carried her lesson into their own lives. And so, the moral resolution of the clash was not simply that Crockett triumphed over Barrett. It was that dignity triumphed over arrogance. Justice triumphed over hate. Truth spoken calmly, unapologetically proved more powerful than any insult. It was the kind of ending that wasn't really an ending at all, but a beginning. A spark, a reminder, a call to every American watching: stand tall, carry truth, and never let arrogance write the final word. Asterisk Section 9, outro and call to action 300 words. And so, the confrontation that began with a single insult ended with something. Far greater revelation that will be remembered as one of the defining clashes of our time. Judge Barrett sought to diminish, to dismiss, to dominate. But Jasmine Crockett turned that attack into the fuel for a truth so powerful it could not be ignored. That truth, the shocking truth, is simple. Arrogance crumbles, but dignity endures. Hate divides, but justice unites. Power drawn from fear will always fracture, while power drawn from truth can inspire a nation. This was never just about a courtroom. It was about America. It's about who we are and who we choose to be. And in that choice, Crockett showed us a path. Stand firm, speak boldly, and never allow the arrogant to write the final chapter of our story. But here's where it matters most. The fight isn't over. This moment isn't frozen in one viral clip. It's alive in you, the audience. Every share, every conversation, every voice that refuses to be silenced carries this truth further, pushes the ripple wider, and builds the movement stronger. So if you felt the power of Crockett's, stand. If you believe justice is greater than hate, dignity greater than arrogance, don't let this end here. Subscribe now to join a community that refuses to look away, thrives on truth, that believes in justice loud enough to shake the walls of power. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and be part of the movement that proves the shocking truth cannot be buried. It can only rise. This is not just a channel. This is your voice, your movement, your fight for truth, and together, we've only just begun. Asterisk. For more updates like this, please do like the video and subscribe the channel with bell button on so you can get notified with each updates. Thanks for watching.